I'm here with Jeff Augustine, a noted private investigator, has been following the Danny Masterson case from the very beginning and was actually there at the sentencing. So he's certainly been one of the most vocal figures in exposing the truth about Scientology, and also, which we'll talk about, exposing some of their finances and how you could kind of follow the money to really uncover some serious corruption happening within the cult. So yeah, we just wanted to have him on, and so I guess first, if you want to introduce yourself and just give a little bio, and maybe talk a little bit about Karen and her interesting story as well.
Sure. Thanks, Dodge. Glad to be on. Let me, basically, my blog's called the Scientology Money Project, and it's at scientologymoneyproject.com. And I've been a critic of the Church of Scientology for about 20 years now. And then my wife was a high ranking member, Karen de la Carriere. She trained under L. Ron Hubbard on the flagship Apollo to be a class 12K supervisor. So that's the highest you can go as a class auditor in the Church of Scientology. Hubbard only made 7 class 12s, and she was one of them. And then she was married to Heber Jensch, who was the president of the Church of Scientology for about 40 years. They
Sure.
were married in the 80s and divorced around 1990. They had a child named Alexander. Now, he died at age 27 in 2012, and it was under mysterious circumstances. LAPD initially investigated as a homicide. So you can Google death of Alexander Jensch. It became an international news story. It was extremely stressful. And one thing they did, Alexander died at the home of his in-laws here in LA, and his wife wasn't there. They were separated, or he'd come out to look for a job, but they let him sit there sick with a high fever. You know, if they had taken him to just a walk-in clinic for antibiotics, he wouldn't have died.
Right. Very
So
basic
when
care.
his father-in-law found him dead, his OT father-in-law found him dead, he immediately calls the church's Office of Special Affairs. What do I do? They come over, rummage through things, and Vicky Podboreski, the church's criminal defense attorney who's involved in the Masterson case, and has some
Interesting. I
documents,
didn't know that.
perhaps.
Interesting.
Oh, she'd been around a long time. She's a criminal defense attorney, and she has worked for the church a long time. She went up with some documents, and I understand she may be the subject of a grand jury investigation here in Los Angeles. That's the talk, or why she had some DA documents she shouldn't have. Uh,
Interesting.
so Karen wanted to see her dead son and kiss him goodbye, and the Church of Scientology said, "No, you can't." And that was the most sadistic things I've ever seen, in my life. It was so utterly sadistic and done out of pure evil. You can't kiss your dead son goodbye. And I don't care what the Evans family says, they're liars. They were part of it, and that's unforgivable. That's on them, and that's on the Church of Scientology and David Miscavige out of pure spite did that. That is so cruel. So one thing I did, I'd been in corporate life for 30 years in technical sales. So one outcome of that, I created the Scientology Money Project, was that I was going to use my corporate skills to take apart the church and explain it, reverse engineer Hubbard, not only his cosmology, his metaphysics, but the finances of the church.
Right.
And this is not trivial, Dodge. Okay, you're the guy on the street, right?
Right.
Person on
Sure.
the street. Here's an example of the kind of work I do on my blog. When I ask you, what is the definition of a Scientologist? How would you answer?
It's a great question. I'd say ostensibly the basic elevator pitch that somebody would give you is it's a religion where it's not based on a god, and you could get auditing to essentially help yourself and empower yourself. That would be the positive press definition of it. The deeper definition would be it's a cult that tries to separate the individual from their family if they're not in Scientology, or anyone who thinks for themselves or thinks individually. It's kind of an us versus them. And once you join the cult, even if you're an adult, your caretaker, you're not free, you're not independent, nor is your caretaker your parent. Your caretaker is now Scientology. and they create this us versus them division. That would be my basic. That would be the good and the bad elevator pitch in my
Yeah, that's
mind.
good. And that's fair. And so what we're doing is we're peeling the layers of an onion. And so what the Church of Scientology would say is that a Scientologist is anyone who reads, studies, and applies the teachings of L. Ron Hubbard to their own life.
Right, even without the formality of church auditing or the
Yeah.
church blessing, which I always found interesting, but the church doesn't actually seem to follow that.
No. So anyway, that's yes, that's a PR answer. Anyone who reads, studies, or applies the teachings of L. Ron Hubbard. Now what I started to do, because I learned this in business, things that you think are obvious are not. And so you have to ask questions like, I started out, part of my blog is, what is a Scientologist? Because there's a misnomer. People think you can walk into a Scientology org, that's what they call their churches, organizations, and that you can give them, 100,000 and get some auditing. It's no, you can't. You can't. So I did this. I've done a series of essays, and it's on my blog, and I've got 10 years of essays. So basically, to do auditing in the Church of Scientology, you have to do a couple things. You have to sign 4 contracts. Okay, so you see a film called Orientation, and you sign a contract that you agree that Scientology is a religion. So they take you behind First Amendment protections.
Interesting. I didn't know that little part, huh?
Yeah, and then you basically,
that.
well, then you sign a contract where you agree never to sue them.
Right.
Basically, if there's any dispute. And it's called the I call it, if you go to the top of my blog, it's called the 4 Evil Scientology Contracts. And this is how they're going to trap you. So you're going to sign an attestation of religious belief regarding the Church of Scientology. And you're going to sign what's called a Religious Services Enrollment Application Agreement and General Release. So basically, you're going to release them from any harm done to you by your participation in the church forever, for perpetuity.
Right.
And what was interesting in I mean, if you were walking out of an org in Chicago, right, or New York, and it was icy and snowy, and you were on Scientology property and you slipped on the stairs and broke your knee, you can't sue them.
Right.
I mean, anything that happens, if you died because you were doing the purification rundown, you can't sue them. You can't sue them for anything. Neither can
McPherson, for example.
No, yeah.
Why isn't her family, died under their care? But you can see with the contracts, it's interesting.
Yeah, and these arbitrate. You agree to go to binding arbitration rather than to sue. Right. In the current lawsuits, they force people into binding arbitration. So you sign that contract, and then you sign a contract where your folders, when you get auditing, they record everything. They record it on pieces of paper, legal size sheets, and then they also record it on video, audio and video. And you agree that you can never see those or read them, and they belong to the church and not you. And then you sign an agreement that I call the kidnap contract. In Scientology, they do some very intense, intrusive, I think psychoterroristic things, especially psych checks. And you go into some very intense processes so you can have what's called a psychotic break, they call it.
Right. Sure.
And if you go insane, you agree to be locked up in what's called the introspection rundown, and that's what Lisa McPherson was locked up into. In other words, you sign a statement that as a matter of religious belief, you do not believe in psychiatry at all, and should you ever wind up in a psychiatric lockdown, like a 72-hour psychiatric lockdown, it's called a 5150 here in California, the Baker Act in Florida, but basically all states have a mechanism where they can lock you up so you don't harm yourself or others in a psychiatric setting. You expect the church to come and remove you and then put you in a Scientology thing. So you sign those 4 contracts. You also have to join their membership organization called the International Association of Scientologists, which is legally a separate corporation from the Church of Scientology International. So at the first outset, they strip you of all your legal and civil rights. lock you into arbitration. So Scientology sells freedom, but the very first thing they do is take away all your freedoms, legal protections, and civil rights. And that's what I want to make known. So those are the kinds of things. And only after they have all the power, so you would call it an imbalanced power equation if
Sure.
you were in science. They take all the power, strip you of everything, and that's the definition inherently of fascism, that kind of power imbalance. You agree to be subject to their system of ethics and justice. They can literally lock you up on the introspection rundown. So that's really what it takes. And then only after that, then you give them, say, 50,000 to get started, right? And you agree every time you start a course, you agree that the Church of Scientology has promised you nothing and that L. Ron Hubbard promised you no particular results. So they shift the burden, they take your money and then shift the burden onto you to self-attest that you received the result of that course. So they don't
That's
promise you
just
anything.
so they never promised. So is that in the fine print, or then wouldn't there be a lot of people who would be reflexively into Scientology and then read that fine print and say, well, results aren't guaranteed. Why would I sacrifice my culture and my life and my daily life? Or is it kind of buried somewhere?
Well, no, it's a policy you sign and you read the contracts. It's called statements by staff members that
Interesting.
Scientology didn't promise you anything. You can't rely on any statements by staff members. So what Scientology is designed around inherently is to find your ruin. So
Right.
if you went on an interview, um, and we've had, Karen and I and you have met for dinner several times, your
Yeah.
friend.
Good time.
And so based on what we shared, I could find your ruin. Like I know
Right.
some of the things that bother you, right?
Yes,
So if
absolutely.
I were a predatory Scientology reg, I would dial in right into your head.
Right.
And so some people who are in a very bad place in life, they'll sign anything,
Right.
and
Right.
and
Interesting.
they're desperate to get the
Sounds
help
well.
because Scientology says we can help you with that. We can help fix
Right.
that, and so they'll sign anything. But also, Dodge, based on consumer behavior, when we sign for a cell phone, you don't really read it, and when
Well,
you
that's what I was. Is it comparable to the cell phone contract? Right.
It's
That's what I
it's
was
like
curious
that,
about. Interesting.
and they
Yeah.
tell you, look, and the way they minimize it is like, hey, look, to protect the church and you, why don't you just approve this paperwork?
Right.
And that's another
Right.
hard sales technique. And you never say sign the contract and press hard. You're signing 8 copies. You always use euphemisms and hard sales like, what if you approve this paperwork, we can get you right into session.
Right.
So you prepay, you sign all these releases, and then they don't give you copies of it at all because you have a urgent problem you want to get to. So that's why they don't really pay attention. And I think that with the modern era, there's so much, like you buy a car, you do anything, there's so much fine print. But look, a cell phone contract, what's the worst hit you're going to take to get out of it? Maybe 400, $500 at the most. 6, I don't know, 200, whatever. You're not going to take a big hit to get out of a cell phone contract. You're going to take an enormous loss trying to get out of a Scientology contract because you can't sue them, as we've seen in so many cases. They want to
And
force
they
you to
won't let you just
arbitration.
walk away and stop auditing and stop contacting them. I mean, from what I gather, they'll hound you.
Well, this is interesting. In America, consent belongs to the believer and not to the church.
Right.
And let me tell you how this works. If you're going to resign from Scientology, what you do when you sign these 4 contracts, you consent, you give your consent, which belongs to you, to be governed by the ecclesiastical laws of the Church of Scientology. So on your
Ecclesiastic.
way out, and I've written this on my blog too, on your way out, you need to formally resign and withdraw your consent to be governed by the laws of Scientology. I hereby resign from the Church of Scientology, the International Association of Scientologists. I specifically withdraw my consent to be governed by the church. And you copy every org, the IES, you copy everyone.
Right.
And so you withdraw your consent, you take back your power. That is, you don't, and they can make you think, if you speak out, they can make you try to sign agreements on your way out. You don't have to. You can resign and say, no, I'm not signing any non-disclosure agreements. You can refuse to sign non-disclosure agreements. You can just say, I withdraw my consent. I'm not signing these agreements. As a practical matter, they can threaten you with disconnection, implied
Right.
fair game, like we're going to make it rough on you if you leave and speak out. I have a current contract where they they want you to agree if you leave the church that you're never going to talk about anything ever, or there's going to be financial,
Sure.
damages that you pay
Be
is
liable.
looked
Right.
at for each occurrence. So they want us, if you ever leave, they want you to be silenced and not exist. And if you speak out, they will engage in fair game. And
Right.
even if you were never in the church,
Sure.
they'll
Case in
still, if
point.
you speak out, as you learned only
Right.
too well, Dodge,
Well, that's
So it's a system of tyranny,
right.
and the reasonable thing to do is to oppose the tyranny of Scientology. And Scientology doesn't understand that it's Western culture itself repudiating this tyrannical system
Yeah.
of
Well,
this
yeah, it's a hot
vicious
take.
cult. Yeah.
Right. Right. And that's what I was curious. So I was uh, curious about their history, especially in the context of journalism, because I think there's been a lot of media going back and forth about Masterson and the results and the acts that he's committed, the vicious acts that he's committed, and the just sentences he's got, which we'll talk about as well. But me being a journalist and you, with your knowledge, being able to connect the dots, I thought it would be fun to kind of talk about the general approach that Scientology takes towards freedom of the press. And I think it all began back in the early 1970s with Paulette Cooper, whom they, if I'm not mistaken, they framed her after going in the church of calling it a bomb scare. And she was close to getting put in prison. I believe there was an investigation, maybe because of the early IRS stuff, and they found some uncovered information where they found out that Cooper was framed, and therefore she got off the hook. But if you want to kind of give a rundown on that, a fascinating
Oh
little
yeah,
bit. My
Paulette
forefathers.
Cooper. She is one of my heroes. Certainly,
Cool.
I
I can
just
see
talked
why.
to Paulette the other day,
Cool.
and
Tell her I'm a fan and that I very much look up to her.
oh, she's a true hero.
Yeah.
Basically, she wrote a book about Scientology, the scandal of Scientology,
Right. A whole
and
book. Right. She was originally just investigating it and apparently found it so informative and insane that she decided to make this a long-term project, if I'm not mistaken.
sure, and
Yeah.
that's one of the uh, interesting things about being a journalist is you start going down a rabbit hole because
Right. Mhm.
I'm an investigative journalist, a
Right.
blogger,
Yes. Absolutely.
and I got a press pass at the Masterson trial. Um, yeah, once you start going down a rabbit hole, doors keep opening, you keep finding more and more. So Paulette wrote her book, and they fair gamed her. They even put a guy in there whose name was Don Alverzo. I know his real identity, helped to find it.
Oh,
And to be
wow.
her boyfriend. They try to drive her to suicide or insanity. That's the ultimate
Right.
purpose of
There
fair
was like a
game is
formal operation. Wasn't there a formal, like almost like a CIA thing, like Operation Upset Paulette or something?
yeah, there was an operation. What back then, before the Office of Special Affairs, the precursor was Guardian's Office. So
Okay.
Scientology actually writes out programs how to destroy Paulette Cooper.
Right.
It
Right.
has simple titles
Step
like
by
that,
step.
and you write down all the steps and the plans. And the purpose of fair game is to either drive you into silence, or to drive you to insanity, or to drive you to suicide. So they are not screwing around. Okay,
Right.
they're that destructive and evil. So what they did is Paulette. They had some fellow come to her door with a delivery, and she had, they handed her the clipboard to sign for it. They got her fingerprints from the back of the
Right.
clipboard, lifted them, and put it on a letter and mailed in a bomb threat to the government, and her fingerprints were there.
God,
Now,
is that interesting?
how the government back then found out it was her fingerprints had to be some dirty PIs behind the scenes linking it. So she was
Wow.
charged with making a bomb threat,
Right.
and she was sued. I don't know how many. She was sued. I don't know, a dozen times. There's several
I didn't know
lawsuits.
that. Wow.
So fast forward, simultaneous to harassing Paulette, In 1972, L. Ron Hubbard wrote a program, Snow White, when he was living in hiding in Queens, New York.
Sure. Let's go after the IRS agents.
Well, basically, it was a program. Hubbard wanted to know what the government had on it. You know, if you watch these police interview tapes, I'll set the stage. Okay. If you go on YouTube, like, because I'm a private investigator in the state of California, and sometimes I interview people. So to watch the masters at work, I go to YouTube and watch the police detectives interview people, interview suspects. And the suspects will invariably play a game where they want to know what you have on them.
Right.
They want to know what. So, like, let's say you're a suspect in a crime, and I'm the police detective, right? You're going to be playing a game where you want to know what I have on you,
Right.
and I might give you a little bit, so you give me something, and that's an interview technique. Well, if I give you something, you give me something, you know. And it, so L. Ron Hubbard, when he was on the flagship Apollo in the Mediterranean, there were rumors running amok that it was a CIA ship. And back then, the CIA was hated. Hated. I mean, it still is in many circles, right? But the CIA was hated in that part of the world. And so Hubbard was kicked out of ports. The Apollo was not allowed in port after port
Right.
after port. And that's one reason they had to come ashore in 75. Hubbard wanted to find the source of the rumors of where this was coming from. But to do so, he needed US government records. So he basically organized a plan to systematically burglarize. He uses
Wow.
people to systematically burglarize government offices,
That's
including
like
the
Watergate
IRS. And
times
maybe,
10.
yeah, and the thing
Pioneer.
is, I know one of the Snow White burglars,
Interesting.
and he told me one night I had a long layover somewhere on a flight, and we talked for like 3 hours, and he was told me about actual burglaries and how they did it and how simple it was.
Huh.
Like, this guy got a job as a janitor in a building where there was, a firm they were interested in burglarizing. And so he would go in at night and as the janitor and just go in the office where they wanted files, take them out, copy them on that firm's own copier, the old, what they call the
Wow.
Xerox machines,
Right.
put all the files back so nobody would know better, and then hand the files during his lunch break to a handler and then finish out his
Infiltration
shift.
stuff. They're good at that. They're unique with that.
Really
It's
good.
placing these little moles in all these different organizations.
But government offices and,
Makes
it's
it
over
so easy.
100,000 documents. So, two of the guys got caught one night coming out of the, in DC. They were doing, supposedly, legal research, right? And long story short, Michael Meisner, one of the agents, and the story's been told, it's worth reading online, but the church hid him. They actually locked him out in an apartment. He escapes
Wow.
because they don't know what he's going to do with them. He has reason to worry they might kill him. So the Scientologist Guardian's Office guy escapes, goes to a bowling alley, calls the FBI, and then he cooperates. And then so on July 8,
Real
1977,
hero.
they raid two Scientology offices here in LA, Florida, and they seize the documents as 128 agents, FBI agents, the largest ever raid in U.S. history for domestic espionage. And they got everything. I mean, they got everything. And that's where the Paulette Cooper documents emerged. And the plot,
Interesting. Huh.
yeah, the plot to form former Clearwater Mayor, the late Gabe Cazares.
Oh, right. I heard he was, framed for that. Right.
So, and this, of course, led to uh, 12 top officials of Scientology, 11 or 12 top officials, including Mary Sue Hubbard, L. Ron Hubbard's wife.
Sure. Wife. Right.
He
Fall
he
girl.
and L. Ron Hubbard was an unindicted co-conspirator.
Right.
So the sweep of stealing 100,000 documents, so it became more than just finding out what the government has on us. It
Right.
became finding out everything we could.
Right.
There were
Including our
purportedly
enemies.
a packet of supposedly, according to my source, who's unimpeachable, he had no reason to lie about it. During the Watergate scandal, there was a secretary who was a Scientologist working for one of the people who had been charged in Snow White, and
Huh. That's interesting.
she copied a lot of the Watergate documents,
Huh.
and
I
they
did
were
not know that's fascinating. I did not know there's a direct Scientology Watergate
well, no, this is just
situation.
opportunistically because, like,
Well, sure,
if you're
but
only going
place
after what the IRS and other agencies have on Scientology, it became opportunistic. They would just
right.
steal other unrelated documents
What
to
else
just
is lying around? Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of like you know how crooks get greedy?
Right,
If you're
right.
gonna steal
Interesting.
100,000, why not steal a
Still
million
million.
because it comes
Right.
easier? Like there was a story recently of a church secretary. She embezzled, she started embezzling one year 5,000, then the next year
Okay.
20, and then suddenly she's embezzled, over $1 million over 8 years. So it's kind of like that thing, right? But these Watergate documents were in the mail, and the postal inspectors were just randomly inspecting packages, and they found them. And they went, "Why does Scientology have these Watergate documents?" And this was during Watergate.
Right. Right.
So anyway, so that
Bizarre.
resulted in Hubbard's wife going to prison and being deposed, and the downfall of the Guardian's office, which was converted into
Oh, I
Office
lost you
of
for a
Special
second.
Affairs. So
So,
so
sorry. So
uh,
you're saying interesting
yeah,
connection.
yeah, and that was I wish they would make that into a movie. That'd be a really interesting movie.
Really is, because it's all about espionage, and I can imagine it now. And the mold janitor coming in, and you're right. There's a lot of great visuals to it, isn't it? So what? So that's it. So Paulette Cooper. So she was. Did she ever go through a court case to answer to the bomb threat, or had the documents been uncovered before it got to that point?
They uncovered the documents. I mean, she was being prosecuted, but they found the documents.
Okay, so it's in the middle of so it's before a grand jury, but in the middle of the investigation. So good
So,
timing.
yeah, somewhere along there, and she of course sued the church
Right.
for
Okay.
doing all this to her, and they paid her a lot of money.
Oh, so
And
she was successful.
oh yeah, damn right, she
Good.
had smoking gun evidence, and at
Well,
this
yeah.
point, the last thing you're going to do is try to fight it. You write a check, and she wouldn't sign a non-disclosure agreement.
Good honor.
Yeah, really good on her. She had, the power shifted suddenly, where we tried to frame you for a felony, and we're in the middle of, you know, we might go out of existence as a church.
Right.
I mean, because that was a real existential threat. They could have been disincorporated by the U.S. government. There was so much
Right.
at
Amazing.
stake, and that happened to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the 1880s. They were disincorporated by the
Huh.
U.S. government and their assets seized because they were lawless.
Right.
So there
Well,
was a
yeah.
parallel
Same
where
Utah.
in U.S. history where that could have happened. Yeah.
So how? So it's interesting. All of this happened. The zenith of Scientology, when they had the most amount of members, my guess would be what, mid-70s, early
Yeah,
80s.
probably. Yeah, that period. Yeah,
So
mid '70s, early '80s. Yeah.
so then how come they still got the tax exempt status? Obviously, that was a big push and a very significant operation. But was it because they were like, if they tried to do the same thing now to a journalist, I mean, they got me fired, but they're not going to try to frame me for try to frame me for a felony or anything. If they tried that now, would they not? Would they be immediately discredited as a religion, lose their tax exempt status? How is the church able to move on from that? Do they have connections where nobody would prosecute them for framing somebody? Or it's amazing that just
Well,
ended up almost as a blip. It cost them money, obviously, for Cooper, but no terms, no tangible prosecution for anybody
oh no,
in the
there
role.
was a prosecution. The
Interesting.
defendants had to sign a stipulation of evidence, and several of them went to prison.
Oh, they did.
I
Okay.
think most of them went to prison
I never knew
for
that. Okay.
short periods of time. No, they signed a stipulation of evidence. They didn't walk away, and
Right.
it's on my blog. It's a stipulation of evidence where
Yeah.
they
Let's see
agreed
that.
they did this, and this. And what happened is, and I talked to the late Bill Franks, who was the executive director international of the church. Mary Sue Hubbard's attorneys felt she could go to court and fight it. And L. Ron Hubbard said, hell no, to Bill Franks, cut off funding for Mary Sue's legal bills. She's
Wow.
gonna have to take a hit. She have
Left her to
you know,
dry.
Well, because Hubbard could have been Hubbard, he doesn't have to testify against his wife, but the damage it does to the Church of Mary Sue Hubbard going through a case that I don't think was winnable. I've talked to
Sure.
my sources said they thought it was winnable. So there was a prosecution, and it did result in the dismantling the Guardian's office and the new guard under David Miscavige taking over. And that's where the shift in power, as Hubbard was dying and winding down his life. Miscavige emerges as action chief, and then he becomes chairman of the board, Author Services,
right,
Incorporated, and so on. So no, they couldn't. They couldn't get away with it. There were two Scientology, or there was a Scientology PI who was arrested and charged and went to jail for hacking the phones of Tony Ortega and Mike Rinder.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
So tax exemptions. I'll give you the short answer of tax exemption, and I have a different view, and maybe I do a longer video with we could have a tax expert on.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But basically, Scientology in the 80s went after the IRS on a public relations attack. So they started a front group called Citizens Citizens for an Alternative Tax System, and they basically wanted to eliminate the IRS and have a 10% flat tax. Just get rid of the IRS. And they were anti-tax. And the government doesn't like anti-tax people.
Right.
It doesn't like it. Had a kind of a sovereign citizen flavor. And then all these individual Scientologists sued because Scientology had lost its tax exemption in 1967 after finding everything inured to the benefit of L. Ron Hubbard. So they continue on as if they were tax exempt, right? And there were some cases. So it finally comes to a head where they apply for tax exemption, and that's Monique Yingling, David Miscavige's longtime attorney. And she was sort of the architect of tax exemption.
Wow.
And all the lawsuits, Scientology's, that could have been consolidated into a single case. There was a legal win for the government. You can look it up. It's called Hernandez versus the Commissioner. And IRS didn't have to give them. So the idea that they intimidated the IRS, I don't buy it. I don't believe it. The IRS. And the reason I go contrary to Doug Franz, with all due respect to Mr. Franz and others, Tony Ortega, I mean, there's people I don't agree with. The IRS helped take down organized crime in the 1980s when the RICO law was enacted.
Sure.
And really, you could have got the FBI involved. You could have done a lot of stuff. So I don't think the IRS as an entity was intimidated by Scientology. And they could have swept up all those. You didn't have to give all those lawsuits individual trials. They could have been consolidated by the Justice Department. So they had a lot of remedies. But what they did, they filed like a little known $110 million plus lawsuit against senior IRS officials. Dodge, there's a law. You can sue government officials as individuals. It's called a Bivens, Bivens, Bivens lawsuit. So Scientology filed a Bivens lawsuit against, I think, about a dozen senior IRS officials in the Criminal Investigation Division and here in LA. And these were the top IRS officials who were opposed to giving Scientology a tax exemption. And this effectively took them out of play. And I think the architect of this was Monique Yingling's husband, the late Jerry Pfeffer. It was a strategic hit to take them out of play. That allowed the IRS commissioner to restrict his team on looking at Scientology's tax exemption. It allowed him to get rid of the old guard opposition, restrict his investigators to a very narrow set of documents submitted by the Church of Scientology. And Richard Reese, who was a senior case supervisor national at Flagland Base, that just means like he's like the guy in charge of auditing for all of Scientology and reports directly to Hubbard. The late Richard Reese was a roommate of Bill Clinton.
Who appointed Fred Goldberg?
Well, I don't know. The timeline, I'm not sure. I think
it was all during Fred Goldberg, who was under Clinton, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
it's
because
IRS guy.
the IRS commissioner is a revolving door, but Fred
Yeah,
Goldberg is in the
quite a
mix.
few, sure.
Now I heard that there was a $5 million donation made to the Bill Clinton Library at about this time. And
Interesting.
I'd have to go to Arkansas to check out the records. But if you're a crusading journalist with time, this would be interesting to
I
go
was gonna
down.
go down south, so it's, Arkansas sounds like a good detour.
Well, look
That's
for a
awesome.
$5 million donation made, and we could
Yeah.
trace it back.
I
So
might, yeah,
that's
FOIA, right? I could go to the library, just ask to see the records.
just do it. That's
Yeah.
just something I heard.
God, that would be cool to if
So I
try to
think
uncover some connection. That's fascinating.
maybe Goldberg has never answered, and he'll
No,
never answer for what he did. The IRS commissioner, he'll never answer, and he's in a law firm. Usually, if you're IRS commissioner, you either want to go up to Treasury and be someone in Treasury, or you want to leave and become highly paid in private practice. That's Mead Emery, their IRS consultant. And they hired him. He was a former IRS guy who knew the system and how to do it. And there's since been a big conspiracy theory that Mead Emery somehow took over Scientology to get control of its tech for the U.S. government to get the real OT levels. It's all
wow.
kind of stuff online. But I think it's more prosaic. It was an administrative procedure. They agreed to drop the lawsuits. They also agreed to become tax compliant because at the end of the day, if you look at the amount of money at stake, and it was less than $1 billion, I think it was about half that. You want to have a church that's tax compliant. Hubbard's dead. They blamed Snow White on the rogues who they purged.
Right.
Supposedly, they didn't. They just went to another company. So it's sort of like there was a 5-year probationary period after tax exemption. And I think the IRS was hoping they would give them enough rope for Scientology to hang itself.
Right.
So I think there was something like what's called an offer in compromise, something like that. Like, we'll turn over all the documents, we'll answer all your questions, because there's something like 8 feet of documents in the evidence room in the IRS in DC you can review. And I posted a lot of them online.
Yeah,
And the final agreement was leaked by the New York Times. So I think it was a matter of getting compliance, stopping the anti-tax, and then giving 5 years. But what David Miscavige did after tax exemption is he ordered all Scientologists to get in compliance with the IRS. So if you had to file past returns or you owed money, you had to drop your lawsuits, so you had to get with it. So there was a 5-year period where they stayed squeaky clean, and there was a tax
interesting.
compliance committee where the IRS, this teams of IRS agents in black suits, white shirts, black ties, would meet and go over the records for 5 years straight with the CTCC, which was the Church Tax Compliance Committee. And then after that 5 years was up, Miscavige could do anything he wanted. But at the same time, because the Christian evangelicals in America are so powerful, as are the Latter-day Saints, the Catholics, there was a little-known law in 1998 passed when the Congress restructured the IRS, and it allowed for only 3 people in the entirety of the U.S. government to call for revocation of a 501c3 tax exemption: Secretary of Treasury, IRS Commissioner exempt organizations. So once that passed, it became very difficult. Those pressures were in part brought by the horror of Waco,
Sure.
where the U.S. government
Idiots.
slaughtered women and children they didn't need to. Janet
Yeah, sure.
Reno and Bill Clinton did not need to. They could have waited. Time was on our side. And then Ruby Ridge,
Sure.
where,
But all of the same era, 2 years apart from each other or something like that.
well, yeah, those were horrific mistakes by the government
Right.
to
Oh, the
kill Randy
libertarian
Weaver's wife
rallying
and
cries,
son.
especially Ruby Ridge, is a famous. I mean, Ruby Ridge started a whole political movement, really.
Yeah, and it's one of those things is, civil rights. They did not need a sniper to kill
No,
Randy Weaver's wife and
ran some
son.
tune in his cabin. Yeah, right.
No, I mean that was slaughter,
Right.
as was Waco. So there were a lot
Right.
of forces that intersected that benefited Scientology and other groups. And the
God,
First
that's
Amendment.
interesting. Right. It was right, when they got the exempt status, that was right in the era following Ruby Ridge and Waco, when anti-government sentiment maybe not until now it's similar, but was really at an all-time decade high. So
Yeah.
I wonder if they looked at the timing in that regard.
It'd be interesting to put down a timeline of Ruby Ridge, Waco, and tax exemption.
Yeah, I want
But
to say Waco is 94 and Ruby Ridge must have been 2 years before that.
yeah,
I'm not
but in my
mistaken, but I could be
opinion,
wrong.
the IRS wasn't intimidated. They were
Right.
maybe
Doesn't sound like it.
there was some influence behind the scenes at a high level.
Right.
You know, uh, I think corruption is a better explanation than intimidation.
Yeah.
In my opinion,
It's a unique view.
corruption.
Yeah, sounds pretty
Someone
valid.
played ball with someone else to get something. Because, like I said, the IRS helped the FBI take down organized crime in the 1980s. So if you're willing to fight the five families, the
Right.
five Cosa Nostra families in New
You
York,
have
you
more
sure
money
as
than
hell are not afraid of this little cult
right. Good
based out
point.
of LA and Florida. You're not. And so corruption, in my mind, better explains it than intimidation. Because, hey, look,
Right.
I'm just one person, my wife and I, and we're not intimidated by the church.
Right.
They've been here, they've fair gamed us, they do all that
Sure.
stuff. Leah's not intimidated. Mike
No.
Rinder,
Right.
Amy Scobie, Claire Matt Pesh, SPTV, we're not intimidated.
Right.
So why the hell would the IRS be
IRS.
intimidated by these goons? And if there was any intimidation, they could have had the FBI arrest these people.
Fascinating. Right.
I mean, there's so many, and probably we'll never know the real truth because the IRS is not willing to explain things. We'll probably never know the real truth.
It's worth a
altogether.
shot. My dad is a friend of Fred Goldberg, so you never know.
Yeah.
Maybe you could try to interview him and ambush him. I met him a couple times.
No, I think Fred will be like me. Meet Emery, that retired IRS guy. Someone called him up and
So we tried before.
and asked him, wanted to interview him about it after the fact. And Meet Emery, the late Meet Emery, said, I don't care to talk about it. And the guy said, would you care to have your memory refreshed? And he said, no, I don't care to have my memory refreshed, and hung up. Because legally, you don't have to have your memory refreshed.
No. No, you can just brush it under the rug if you want and pretend it never happened.
You don't have to answer journalist questions either.
Right.
You don't have to answer
Right.
the PI's questions. I'm a civilian. I don't have any special powers.
Right.
You can tell a PI, Scientology, or any other breed to go F off. You don't have to answer anything. Always remember to assert your rights. And that's why it's so bizarre that given the rights we have as citizens in America, that the first thing the Church of Scientology wants to do is strip you of all those rights and protections.
Right.
That's why I say it's a tyrannical fascist organization, because any organization that had your benefit in mind wouldn't do that to you.
Right. Give you
They
freedom
just
of
wouldn't do
speech and
it.
freedom of movement. As you mentioned, they've
Yeah.
locked people inside Gold Base, inside the RPF,
Yeah.
inside, the hotel in Clearwater, Lisa McPherson. They've locked people inside. So yeah, no, quite literally and figuratively.
Yeah. Yeah. And religion in America, people outside America don't understand. There's case law where religions are allowed to inflict very harsh discipline. There's a famous case I have on my blog where religions are allowed to inflict very harsh discipline on members of its clergy. So if you're in clergy in America, if you're a religious worker, you don't get overtime, you don't get pension, they don't have to do anything to you. You take a vow of poverty.
Right.
And they make it sound noble, a vow of poverty, but it's really slave labor in my book. So religion gets a lot of special protections. I don't think it should.
And that leads me to a question that's interesting. Internal religious arbitration. Scientology has leaned on that obviously more than once. And I'm blanking on it now, but I'm sure you could refresh it. What is the most recent case where they successfully won, even in today's day and age? I want to say it was related to Miscavige. It's either the labor trafficking or maybe it was sexual abuse cover-up. But what was it where they used the excuse of having religious arbitration recently?
Well, no, in every in
or
every
they were
civil
successful
case,
doing that.
they've asserted arbitration.
Right.
Now, Laura Dykeman or Laura DeCrescenzo, she was able to get around that and get her folders. And so I don't have my air traffic control board up because
Right.
my blog, I watch Scientology, Money, Crime, Lies, and Legal Matters, and I just don't have up my air traffic control
Right. There's a
board.
lot of them. Yeah.
But every civil case, that is not criminal,
Right.
with
It's all
Masterson,
civil.
they
Right.
certainly couldn't assert anything.
Right.
But in every legal case, that's civil case that's going there, they're arguing arbitration.
Right.
And I don't know the status. I think the Garcia case, they asserted it successfully and made a payoff, and they're fighting it, tooth
And
and
which was
nail.
the Garcia? What involved the Garcia case again?
Well, Luis Garcia and his wife Rocio, they were lied to. For example, they made a representation if they donated a large sum of money, I think it was 55,000, that would pay to put the cross on top of the flag building in Clearwater. But they made that same representation to 7 or 8 other couples.
Right. Funny.
And they wanted refunds of a lot of things. And
Right.
the church just said you have to go to arbitration.
Right. Okay.
So the church had never done an arbitration. So Garcia was groundbreaking lawsuit. I'm glad they filed it, because the church had never done an arbitration. And it exposed to the world just how rigged it's rigged.
Right. Right.
It's rigged. And so you get ordered arbitration, and you go back, and the court gets to rule on it, whether it was, you should go to court or not. So that's something that's currently being litigated. So I don't have a good answer for the outcome, but I think in some cases it'll be sent on to trial.
Right.
Because Scientology, the way they set up the litigation, it's a catch-22 where you have to be a Scientologist in good standing to litigate, and you're not going to make any decision that it's adverse to the interests of your church.
Still be in good standing.
Well, by analogy, let's say that we were Catholics, you and I,
right.
And we were two litigators chosen in a Catholic arbitration. Now, and it's a former Catholic who quit and who's bad mouthing us online, right?
Right.
We're not going to rule in that person's favor.
Right.
Because God's law is higher than human law. And we're not going to slap the Pope in the face or offend the Holy Father.
Sure.
And we're just, as a matter of practice and belief in principle, we're going to rule against the person because we have the power to do so. We don't even want to hear their evidence. So that's in the nature of religious belief, to defend the faith. And however, to the outside world, to a court, does it look like a rigged system? Well, yeah, it's rigged.
Right.
So it's one of those things you have to look at, like a duality. To the Scientologists, the 3 arbitrators, they look like they're protecting and defending Scientology, but a court might look at it as there's no justice here. We're going to send it on to trial. So those are the different perspectives. You have to see what the Scientologists are looking at, because they think it's an assault and an attempt to destroy their religion.
Right. This is always the case. So that was a case when I had my article, simply noting the Lisa Marie Presley Danny Masterson connection. That's essentially what it was. And their argument was that I was going after religion, and it was bigotry. And then the Stand League, the Twitter page, not that I care that much, but they did a Twitter, quasi political attack ad that looks like a political attack ad with my face, with anchoring with a tagline that says, "I got fired for religious bigotry." So that's the reflex, and that leads me into, I guess, the conversation about my experience with them. They've gone after Lisa McPherson. Another story, I think, when we have more time, we'll talk about, went after a reporter a decade after her or maybe even 2, with ABC Australia, because it was ABC, being the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, being governmental. That reporter seemed to have a lot more strength behind him, and his editor stood behind that reporter. And then he wrote, I think, a best-selling book, if I'm not mistaken. So they have this way of creating these enemies where they really don't have to. And
Yeah.
it's this common theme. I mean, the three of us, my courage is not, can't hold a candle to that of Paulette or this gentleman from Australia.
You talking about Brian Seymour?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
I just blanked on his name for a second. But all three of us are embarking on careers exposing this religion when it wasn't a dominant part early on. This guy's work, this was just one of many topics for him, and he found out more and more egregious information. I believe Paulette was at Newsweek, if I'm not mistaken, or
yeah, I don't recall where, but yeah, she was doing okay.
A well-known written, a prestigious written, print publication. So why do you think Scientology got so alarmed? I could understand ABC Australia, or I can understand one of the big brand name print publications that Cooper works for. But why go after a hyper local news media station that represents a city of 100,000 people? Did they not realize that they'd get more? I mean, I guess, the answer for me would be they were trying to control the early media narrative about Masterson. And because I added that, if people Googled it, they would see, if people Googled it, they would see the connection with Lisa Marie Presley, and that they would see that there's more to this story. So why do you think they did it? It's just kind of fascinating to me. It's so small time.
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, let me, I'll set it up. L. Ron Hubbard's policy is to treat every battle, even a skirmish, as a war.
Fascinating, right? Now, there's no relativity, I guess.
Now, the second thing is you're new on the scene.
Right.
So if they can nip it in the bud, if they can destroy you early on, good. It's like the Degraded Daughters of Dianetics, their YouTube channel.
Yeah, I'm a fan of that.
They went after that hard because they're new, to see if they can destroy them or silence them early on.
Right.
Because OSA's product is, their end result they want is called a dismissed attacker.
Right.
So who's this new guy, Dodge? Right. Let's show him what we can do to him. Let's get him fired. Right.
Right.
Hoping that would take you away from it.
Right.
That's Hubbard's policy. They're going to treat it like a full-on war, like you are the New York Times going after them.
Right.
Because they can't distinguish, small threats from large. Everything is a large threat. In the early 90s, with the rise of the internet, Freedom Magazine, their in-house propaganda rag, they had a line that said, "Freedom of speech is not the freedom to attack my religion."
Right.
Well, that's non sequitur, stupid. Freedom of speech
is
the freedom,
right.
is the freedom to do that.
Yes.
And I could just as well say, freedom of speech is not the freedom to put up hate pages on me online, but they do it. So they have hypocritical double standards.
Right.
And they are driven by policies of revenge, and they want to silence every attacker. So they want freedom of speech to talk about how bad psychiatry is and how dangerous it is. They want freedom of speech to attack Leah Remini or Mike Rinder or anywhere else, but they don't want anyone to have freedom of speech to talk about them. And that's the hypocrisy. And again, I said it's tyrannical. So what do tyrants want? Tyrants want censorship.
Right.
So when Scientology uses these, whether it's interfaith groups, attacks on journalists, they're trying to ultimately get their tyrannical form of censorship. Because at the core, Scientology cannot survive in the sunlight.
Right.
And so what you did is you're coming up, there would have been a program written on you to handle you, to hopefully get you fired and then run away and never do Scientology again.
Right.
And unfortunately, there have been some journalists who get a taste of it and they don't want it. They don't like it.
Interesting. Oh, I had the time of my life. It's just the opposite for me. I had fun with it. But
yeah. And I got to meet you, and I'm glad you stood up. And it's sort of a baptism under fire.
Yeah.
But
right.
My hero, one of my heroes is President Truman, Harry Truman.
I'm a fan of his as well.
And his famous saying, "If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen."
Right.
So sometimes when some people, when they get the baptism in fire, they'll go away.
Right.
But I always encourage people, don't let them take away your voice or your freedom or your power.
No, let it inspire you.
Why would you let a cult do that to you?
Right.
You instead go to the internet with it.
Right.
do a
Right.
blog post, do a YouTube channel,
Right.
expose what they're doing,
Right. And there's so much
because
interest in it.
you never back down. You
Right.
never submit to their slavery or tyranny or censorship.
Right, but it's funny because the extremism that they went through, and I was going to ask you about their media people and what it's like now. You know, if they had simply complained, I would have taken it down, and if they had left it at that, I would have wanted to keep my job. And so I would have never talked about Scientology again. But they
Hmm.
had to go through the extra step of saying, no, we won't sue unless you fire him. It's not enough. I even suggested, hey, do you want to suspend me without pay for an entire week or 2 weeks? And I could,
Yeah.
quietly come back and never mention, nope, nope, nope. None of that was acceptable to them. And here's a fun question. I wonder if
Hmm.
they had a media head like they used to, like Mike Rinder or Tommy Davis or Heber, I guess before them. Do you think they would have made that decision? Do you think like Scientology has gotten stupider in terms of how to deal with negative media, or are they just approaching the same way that they would have approached it too?
Oh, they would have done this in the 1950s. They're
Right,
psychotic, driven by
right. No different.
revenge.
Fascinating.
Hubbard said to put in ethics, you need to put some heads on pikes. So
Right, but
you
that
were
might
at,
put your own head on a pike if you put too many heads on a pike
yeah, yeah,
versus let it
that's
go.
true.
Right, or
Uh,
go halfway. If they went halfway, they would have gotten what they wanted. They would have quelled the media narrative that they didn't want out there. But
well, they're driven by revenge, and like I said, because they
yes,
can't make distinctions,
it's
every
prideful and
threat is
vindictive.
as big as every other threat.
Right,
So no, they want, if they can get you fired, then they get higher. Yeah, Office of Special Affairs operates off a point system.
right,
So if they had merely gotten your hand slapped, that's no good. But if they got you fired, they could report that to Miscavige as a big victory against
right,
the malicious press.
right,
So getting you fired only makes
right,
you work harder to expose Scientology.
right,
So
right,
they never see, this is why David Miscavige is insane. This is why L. Ron Hubbard was insane. They don't
really,
think through
right.
the consequences of their
It's right.
action.
It's not practical.
Well, no, it's self-destructive. It's
Right,
I've always said
right,
Scientology is inherently self-destructive. What do you think is going to happen when you systematically burglarize IRS,
right,
government agencies,
right,
and get 100,000? Well, you're going to get raided. The FBI, they're going to put you in prison. You're going to get all the bad press. What do you happen when you get Dodge fired? Well,
right,
that's going to become a news story nationally, and other
right,
journalists are going to take notice.
right,
You know what happens when you know, slander Leah Remini? Well, she's going to sue you for defamation and
right,
libel. What happens when you don't handle Danny Masterson on his sexual assaults within the church and you try to cover it up and blame the victims? Well, he winds up 30 years to life in prison, and the whole world knows that you, Scientology, covered it up.
right,
So this is something that is inherently, Hubbard wrote inherently self-destructive policies into the very DNA of of
oh,
Scientology
that's
that calls
fascinating.
for
Right,
lies, cover-ups, censorship, malice, and that's why I said it's tyranny.
right.
And it's horrific.
Tyranny for
It
tyranny's sake.
destroys people,
Right,
especially children.
right. Sure, sure. And so why here another so why do you think there was a reason they didn't want the Lisa Marie Presley Danny Masterson connection to come out?
Sure,
And is there
because
a reason that hasn't, like in all this coverage in the sentencing or the conviction, her name hasn't been mentioned once. And I wonder if there's a deeper story there. I certainly felt like there was. She was prepared to testify and then got nixed off the original trial because they couldn't do anything Scientological, as I could recall. But it seemed like she was prepared to testify in the retrial, although
I
they hadn't
think
assembled witnesses yet at that point, obviously.
I think that overall, well, DA Reinhold Mueller, well, I think he did an exceptional job. I think he made a big mistake of the first trial, not calling Lisa Marie, and then she sadly
Right.
passed away. We lost her,
Right.
and I don't really know how to answer your question. I
Sure.
don't know
Sure.
how to answer it.
Well, that's the interesting
Um,
part. Right.
there,
Right. My
there,
my crux is she could have testified and was preparing to testify in the original and could have testified in the subsequent. Um,
yeah. I mean, it's
right,
just we'll never know the whole story.
right,
She was. I wish she had testified, but having said that, the one juror who was the foreman, who spoke out. I think even if Lisa had testified, the result would have been the same, given what I think was his
Conflict of
bias.
interest? Right,
Hmm?
sure. Right, you're talking about the
Well,
foreman with his son who got prosecuted by the
yeah,
same.
and I watched him in court
Right.
every day with his arms crossed, sitting back.
Right, so you can see the body language.
Yeah, the body language,
That's funny.
and the second trial was more focused, and there were that's a different podcast, but
Right,
so they had to go after you because the topic of Danny Masterson was so charged
right,
for them,
right,
because they're dealing with, if he's guilty, then they're part of it. They're part of it, and that's what's happened.
right,
And you saw how it's even got worse with Ashton Kutcher and
right,
Mila Kunis speaking out
right.
in support of Danny. Like,
Big
what the hell
apologists.
were they
Right,
thinking?
right. Well, they're
Obviously they
thinking it
thought
wouldn't be public, but then they, you know, right. The fact that they dug into it is bizarre, though. The fact that they didn't, that their apology wasn't, I believe these three people specifically, and I feel like an asshole, was not what that was. So they must have something on them or something.
well, I have my own opinions on that.
Right.
And
It's pretty informed.
whenever you write a letter, whenever I'm not a lawyer, I always consult
Sure.
lawyers before I do things. Like, if I don't know what I'm doing, I'll ask a lawyer. And
Smart.
I have many lawyer friends and acquaintances, and some of them hire me to do some investigations.
Right.
So I always ask them, and given the nature of transparency, you would think they would have talked to a lawyer saying, "Hey, can this be made public?" And the answer would have been, "Oh yeah,
Right.
yeah, of course. That'll be part of the record." Look, I have it, just to clarify things. Danny Masterson's attorney, his criminal defense attorneys, Philip Cohen and Sean Hawley, they put that into a filing into their sentencing. Um, After Masterson's convicted, sentencing comes next, and you basically do a sentencing position. Here's our position on how he should be sentenced. So in their sentencing positions, Masterson's own attorneys put those letters into their document they filed, and it's on my
Right.
blog. It's
Right.
called Read It Here. And he submitted it under his name, Christopher Ashton Kutcher, and then Mila Kunis, along with the other letters. So I have it posted. And but my point, going back, your question, why does Scientology do things that are insane and cause them
Right.
blowback? They don't understand the law of consequences. They don't understand karma.
Right.
They
Right.
just don't, for some reason. And Miscavige would rather have the momentary satisfaction of you getting fired than
Very
understanding that
momentary.
long term, that's a bad idea.
Well, it's bizarre because I was making $30,000 a year and I was somebody with wealthy parents. So what are they going to win from that?
Yeah, like
Right.
exactly.
They-
Or it's like Karen not being allowed to kiss her dead son.
Right. I'm so sorry. Yeah.
It's okay.
It's just petty, but right. It's of no
it's
cost to them.
sadistic.
And you think that's how to put your attackers at bay. Throw them a bone once in a while.
No, they're not going to do that.
Or go halfway. Or again, it was the same thing with me. If they called me to stand down and they said, well, you need to get suspended for a week, but just don't ever post it again. Then they would have successfully neutralized me. As you say, they have qualified me as a dismissed attacker. And I'm sure I'm still a dismissed attacker because the YouTube audience is small and whatever.
No, it's not.
Oh, well, thank you. Oh,
No, I mean,
30,000.
Everything is additive. Everything is additive.
It
And then
is,
it's
isn't it? Right. 30,000 people saw the last video. That's 30,000 additional people. Right.
Yeah, and then
And now
things
it's part
become
of the algorithm and the pop culture lexicon of the evil of Scientology and the corruption of what happened in the Danny
Right.
Masterson case.
So the point is that things are additive, and then they become exponential, and that's what's happened
Right.
over time. The movement to speak out against Scientology became exponential. Early on, it
Right.
was additive, but during that Paulette Cooper phase, and then with the
Right.
internet, it became exponential,
Right.
and then with anonymous, it became asymmetrical.
Right.
It was in asymmetrical internet warfare they don't know how to handle,
Right.
and now they don't know how to handle YouTube.
No.
They're
No.
trying to.
Right. Well, how come they don't have their own, like at least one eloquent YouTube guy who just talks about how much he loves Scientology, who's likable? There's that girl who was very attractive, who was interviewed by, I think, Andrew Gold, and Aaron Smith Levin did a video. And she was a committed Scientologist. I think she talked about how much she adored Tom Cruise. And I'll send you the link and I'll post it in the description. But she would have been a perfect, because she was likable and seemed smart and well-spoken and early 40s attractive, like would have been a perfect person to do it. And I wonder, so how come they don't have that singular like YouTube? Maybe they know they just get, flooded with negative comments and it wouldn't be worth it. But it is fascinating. There's not, or just get Grant Cardone to do it and say how much he loves Scientology. He has a following.
You could moderate all the bad comments. Well, first of all, David Miscavige spent, David Miscavige spent $100 million on Scientology TV. So he bought the old KCET
channel
lot.
2000 on DirecTV, right?
Yeah, and and they do have happy Scientologists on there, right?
Right. They do that. That's very true. But I don't know if they're being paid and they have a script, but I've seen them when I flip through the channel.
Well, one of the rules in a tyrannical dictatorship, and here we're speaking of Scientology under David Miscavige and under L. Ron Hubbard,
right,
is you can't have anyone exceed the leader in popularity or charisma.
God, that's fascinating. That's right. So they couldn't. It's all ego, isn't it? It's so impractical. I'm separating the evil stuff, but they could be much more successful if they were evil and practical. But it's all this ego shit. Yeah, you're right. And then Miscavige would get jealous.
Oh yeah, if you had some
guy with 100,000, everybody's like, "I love your points," and he would hate that.
Well, I mean, for many years going back, Heber Jensch, who no one knows now, but going back,
I know him, sure. And
to
talk
the
about
80s
a
and
likable,
90s,
genial, down to earth spokesperson.
Yeah, Heber was well loved by the church,
right?
And Miscavige hated him,
right?
Because as Miscavige increasingly took power and destroyed his opponents, he had to take out Heber. So that's part of it.
Fascinating. Okay.
Because I'm sure you could find, plenty of friendly, camera-friendly, Scientologists, 20-somethings.
Sure. Yeah.
And you could dial in, but they don't want that because it's so scripted and robotic and controlled. What's funny is Scientology TV has to hire actors who are non-Scientologists
right.
So I made a joke one time on my satire blog, Otate is Great, that at some point Miscavige will declare everyone except himself and Tom Cruise, so that the entirety of the Church of Scientology will be paid actors. And that's satire, but it's probably not far from reality because, the canned production stuff has to follow LRH rules, and it's really boring. Scientology TV is Scientologists talking about Scientology, and then commercials about Scientology and upcoming more Scientology. And they've allowed some independent filmmakers to air their works on there just to get some airtime.
Right.
So but it's $100 million. So yeah, they could have plenty of people talk, but they don't want to.
Fascinating.
They want to control the messaging. And in a way, it doesn't work because unless I mention Scientology TV, most people don't even know it exists.
No.
It rolled out, I think, 2018.
Right. I'm aware of it, right? But
yeah.
That's when I go, because I go to my dad's house and he still has DirecTV, which is almost an antiquity at this point. So that leads me to a question that you might know that I've always been interested in. Scientology, the ability to self-bungle, the ability to make the Masterson case worse than it was for them. One famous attorney that was immediately recognizable visually early on was Tommy Mazzaro, who represented Michael Jackson with the wild white hair, and just has a purely distinct look. What happened to Tommy? I mean, he is an ace lawyer. Was he not? I don't think he was involved at all in the retrial. Do you have any opinion or guesses as to why probably the most famous, one of the top 5 most famous attorneys in the world, decided not to be part of that case? And a fun what if, thank God it happened. But if he were still there and defending Masterson in the retrial, do you think Masterson might have been let off or gotten a lighter sentence? Maybe too vague of a question, but
I saw Mr. Mastrome many times at early on in the trial,
right?
And he's unmistakable, as you said. I think what Thomas Mastrome did is he made the fatal mistake of introducing the Scientology ethics book in into the record. And then Mr. Mueller, the DA, pounced on that and entered it into evidence.
Hilarious. Oh, wow. So he actually made a real
And
egg on his face mistake.
it was really
Funny.
horrible. Also, my opinion, this is just a guess, because it's not like I talked to Tom Mesereau, or he would tell me even if we did. Not like I talked to him. But I think he's such a good lawyer that the micromanagement of David Miscavige and the Scientology attorneys behind the scenes
Right. Wow.
got to him, because I had the feeling he was being micromanaged and pestered and bothered.
Right.
And that, but when he introduced that Scientology text, I don't have it here to hand. When he introduced it into the record, I think Miscavige, really erupted, and that was inexcusable. And that maybe Mesereau was saying, no, I know what to do in court. I defended OJ. Let me handle this. I got this. And they said, no, 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 no. And
Right.
Miscavige likes to think that he's a legal genius.
Right.
And one time when Karen was married to Heber worked for OSA. And OSA has three branches. It's PR, PR affairs is where Heber was. Then it's intelligence gathering. Then it's legal. So
right.
he worked for PR. Karen was his assistant in public relations. So they
Interesting.
weren't involved in any of the fair game stuff.
Right.
Because some people seem to think Karen should disclose stuff, but she left the CRG in 1990.
Yeah.
And she was involved in public relations. So there was a meeting where Heber and Karen were there, and Miscavige was at this meeting, and one of the CRG members said, "Sir, our attorneys said we should do this," and Miscavige exploded into a torrent of profanities and said, "Those blank, 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 blank lawyers, they don't tell us what to do. We tell them what to do."
Right.
So Miscavige has disdain and contempt for all lawyers, I think, except for his consigliere, Monique Yingling. And she does fit the definition of a consigliere. Have you ever seen her in person? She's just got those
Snake eyes.
Nothing behind the eyes,
Yeah.
cold-blooded, really ice cold. And I don't, so that's why it's to your question on the second trial, would Mesereau have prevailed? I don't think so.
Interesting.
Because the jury was the key to, the jury is always the key to it. All right. You can have the best lawyer in the world. It's always the jury. The jury was so much more careful in deliberating the charges.
Right.
And I always, on the second trial, the first trial I watched, I had some criticisms. I wasn't surprised that it ended up hung given the foreman. But the second trial, I really did feel that there would be convict on 2 and hang on 1.
Right.
And it was 8-4.
Well, you called that, didn't you? I think you called that pretty
accurately. I did. I was talking
yes.
to two journalists before the verdicts came in. They thought Masterson would be acquitted. I didn't think so.
Right.
And the testimony was just too powerful, and the jury was very deliberate.
Right.
But it's still, and being in the courtroom when he was convicted, it just was a very powerful experience,
Right. Well, you create this great visual picture, if you want to paint it again, of this, Masterson, after all his female victims, officially getting handcuffed by a Latina woman, which is fascinating.
And a female deputy.
Right.
Yeah. It's in the courtroom. It's super tense because 20 plus years has come down to this.
Right.
And Dodge, when they read the verdicts, it goes really fast.
It's court's fast, man. It's hard to keep up. I've made a few mistakes reporting in it, quite frankly.
I mean, it's like it's like under 2 minutes.
Right.
The clerk reads as the charge when we the jury find the defendant Daniel Peter Masterson guilty with another victim. As to count 2, we find the defendant guilty. Another victim. To count 3, we found they're hung on that, right? But when they say guilty with another victim, then I know there's going to be a second guilty, and then they hang on the third.
Right.
And that's it. In court, there's a protocol where their deputy, taps the person on the shoulder. They have to rise to get handcuffed, and that's where the female deputy. And I still remember, I had such a clear view of it. There were flat black handcuffs, and the female deputy, she puts him in cuffs, and he sits back down, and Bijou's crying a
Right.
lot,
What's that, a
and
whale, right?
yeah, she
Right.
does. She is. And the Masterson clan is just, shocked.
Right. You don't think any of them saw it
Injustice
coming?
is done. Pardon me?
You don't think any of them saw it coming?
I
Fascinating.
thought I think they thought they were gonna get out of it like the first.
Right, right, right.
And when he's handcuffed, Mr. Cohen asked that his client be allowed out until sentencing on $3.3 million bail. The judge ruled that he was a danger to the community
Right. Pretty
and
badass.
exonerated the bail, meaning it's gone, and remanded him to custody. So you see Danny Masterson getting up and being led into the side door where the holding cell is. And he's
Sure.
going to be processed and all the rest has been discussed. And then Judge Olmedo, an excellent jurist, a true legal scholar, thanks the jury for its service. They go out. And that's it.
Right.
And it's one of those things in life where it's been going on so long. And I was so emotionally invested because the Jane Does have been through pure hell.
Mm-hmm.
Being
Mm-hmm.
the victim of that kind of horrendous assault. And the implication was he did drug them, of course, right?
Right.
Not to take away anything from any other victim, but to have Scientology fair game on top of it only makes it
Sure.
even more hellish and nightmarish. The victim's sentencing statements were powerful, but going back to the conviction, he's led away. People start leaving the court. I leave for a few minutes to go make some phone calls, and then I come back into the courtroom. I leave, go outside of where you can make calls because there's a screening. You got to go outside, and I come back in, check back in through security, and the Masterson family is still there, like they're at a funeral. They
Huh.
haven't moved.
Fascinating.
They sat there for like 20 minutes in shock. They're
So they're
not
almost that
moving.
stunned. I did not. That's funny. So they're
They're
just sat there.
Yeah, they're not processing it.
Wow.
So to me, that was quite sudden. They come back in after
Right.
20 minutes and they're still there.
Wow.
It's like a funeral.
And
Someone's
they
just
were
died.
at the sentencing, I assume, too. I'm sorry you missed that. I was sick, but I'm glad you were there.
Yeah, the sentencing they were there, and that was packed. And there was a motion for a new trial, which basically means, Judge, we want you to revoke the jury's
Right. It's a Hail Mary,
finding of
right, but
guilt.
rejected.
No, a new trial means revoke
Right.
the jury's decision and let Danny Masterson walk out of here a free man
Right.
and have a new trial. And she said no.
Right.
So that went by. Nobody expected him to get a new trial.
Right.
So all it was he going to get 15 to life or 30 to life. So she sentenced him 15 to life on both counts to be run consecutively.
Consecutively. So that means 30. Right.
30 to life. Yeah. And it's been discussed, California's an 85% state. So he's eligible at about 25 and a half years, or when he's about
People
72.
gave me guff for that, saying he has to at least serve 30. And I said, no, especially with that percentage. And then also the age qualification. If you're over the age of 60, which he will be, he could get out in 25 years.
Yeah. By the way, the age,
probably.
the elderly thing doesn't count because you have to be 50 years old and have served 20 consecutive.
Right.
Or be 60 years old and have served 30 consecutive. So he won't qualify for that, as I understand it. And I'm not a lawyer.
Right.
And there's been some argument. What he was sentenced to was an indeterminate sentence of 30 to life.
Right.
He was not sentenced to the minimum he was sentenced to was 30, maximum is life. It's called an indeterminate sentence in California. Right. So yes, he was sentenced 30 years to life. It's to be determined by the parole board when he becomes eligible. Now, at 25 and a half, if he survives, I don't think he does. I don't think he survives prison. But if he survives, the Jane Does are free to come to the parole hearing and talk about how they're still traumatized.
Right.
The victims get a say at the parole hearing, so there's no guarantee.
Can you have a lawyer maneuver that successfully? I assume his parents have a lot of money. Can you get a lawyer to be involved in the parole? Masterson's parents, I assume. Can you get a lawyer to be involved in the parole process and strengthen your
Well,
case for
one, I don't
parole.
know that they have a lot of money at all.
Oh, I
I mean,
thought they did. I thought she's a noted actress. Maybe I'm wrong. Well, then
I
I guess
mean,
we know where the
they
financing
have
for
some
legal
money,
team.
but it's not, I don't
Right.
think they have. Yeah,
Okay.
you can have a lawyer. Sure, you can have. An inmate has a right to counsel.
Right.
Many lawyers or many inmates who can't afford it file plenty of pro se motions, but a lawyer is the right. I'm sorry, let me rephrase. An inmate has a right to legal counsel at all times
Sure.
through the
Sure.
course of incarceration on
Right.
any matter where you could use a lawyer. Sure.
But you don't think it'll actually get them? Are there no chance?
It's 25 and a half years out. It'll be what, 2048?
Right.
2048.
Right.
So I'll be 91 years old
Right.
and I plan to still be around. So
I hope so.
I'll go to hear it and
Right.
report on it on
Right.
whatever,
I'll talk to you then. I'll talk to you
I,
in 20 years.
on whatever AI, if I'm controlled by AI or whatever, but we'll hook back
Right.
up in 2048 and report on it, Dodge.
Right.
Okay.
Right. We'll figure that out. Why do you think he's going to get killed in prison? That's an interesting one.
Well, I didn't say he would be killed in prison.
That's true. You
Okay.
did not say that.
I did not say
You
that.
say
I
he
said I
won't
don't
be
think he'll survive prison.
survive. So what do you think that's interesting? So do you think he'll try to off himself? Do you think a health condition will come or any of the three? Or does it just get shanked because then people don't like rapists?
There's only a couple possibilities for how it ends, and I'm not going to predict
Well,
other
right.
than California State Prison is very hostile to I refer people to a YouTube video. Wes Watson, I watch his videos. He
Okay.
spent 10 years in California State Prison,
Cool.
and if you go to Wes Watson's YouTube channel and you just Google the worst charge you can get,
Mhm.
and you watch that video, Wes Watson, who was actually there and can explain it. So there's only
Right.
a couple of ways
Fascinating.
Danny could develop health problems if he
Right.
was. It's been reported that he has an alcohol abuse problem that was very serious.
Yes,
Okay,
I've heard that. Right.
now he could have cirrhosis of the liver.
Sure. And kill you very quickly. Yeah.
He could be taken out by another inmate like Jeffrey Dahmer was beaten to death with a mop handle.
Right. Right.
So
Sure.
I don't know. I'm just saying 25 years with those charges in California.
Fascinating. Right.
He can go into PC. So he may survive. I could be wrong. I
Right.
don't know. I'm just saying that
Right.
from people who have served in prison, the opinion that they post online, and I've watched at least a dozen videos of people who served in California prisons.
Oh,
Their prediction is he won't. Okay.
fascinating.
And he's a celebrity. They
Right.
talk about him being extorted and things.
Right. It's
But
different
this
than
is
Bernie Madoff, for example, who gave guys stock tips, and they just look at that differently morally. Stealing somebody's money is different than raping somebody.
well, you know what's interesting? Tommy Scovel made the observation. Look, in prison, there's different kinds of crimes. If you murder someone, that's one type of crime. But if, like
Right.
Wes Watson says, if you touch a child or a woman, you did what? Wes says you did what?
Right.
That's the worst. He says that's the worst charge you can have on you as a human being.
All right. The old Edwin Edwards quote from, Governor of Louisiana. The only way they'll ever catch me is if they catch me in bed with a dead woman or a live boy.
Oh, God.
That's pretty. Maybe I'll edit that out.
Well,
Keeps me arrested every
yeah,
time.
that should be edited out, I think.
Probably.
But going back to what we were saying, if Scientology allowed its members to call the police on other members, this would have been handled way back in 2003. But
Fascinating.
because
Right.
Scientology forbids its members to go to police because it tried to cover up and interfere, the consequences are exponentially worse in 2023 than they would have been in 2003.
Right.
And we don't know how many more Masterson victims will come forward.
Yeah. How many? So
So
what? So I wonder. I mean, you might not know the legalese to this, but one of the things that I want to do is cover all the future trials, and there's so many to keep track of. One of them would be in Canada. I presume Toronto, although I don't know the exact city. If somebody is in jail or prison, can they be flown to stand trial? Will the magistrate, because it's a British prosecuting system in Canada. Will the magistrate try to bring charges or no? What's your prediction for that? Because I want to go. I'll be there every day if there's an actual trial, but I'm curious if you happen to know or have any
I'm
idea.
not a lawyer, but it's
Right.
simply a matter of charging him and then having him extradited to stand trial.
And you can still do that even if you're serving in prison. I presume you, right. I mean, you think of,
I don't. This is
cartel
something.
stuff, but
This is something I'd have to defer to Zach to, because I don't know.
right.
In some cases, you're extradited and you stand trial,
Right.
and in other cases, you have to finish your trial before you're extradited. I think with Canada, you
Right.
would be extradited to stand trial. You'd be sentenced if you're found guilty. You'd go back to California to finish your sentence, and then
Hilarious.
once you
Then you get,
finish that, you would go to Canada.
and
But
so would you
so
be in Canada to stand trial, or you do it virtually from prison or something? Would they
no,
fly into
you're
Canada?
entitled to go to a court and have a lawyer represent you.
So
You
here's
have to
the
be tried
interesting,
by a jury.
well,
Yeah.
here's something that's interesting then. I mean, there's a reason why they might not do it. I doubt it. But all right, so let's say he goes to Canada and is standing trial there for that accuser. Would that mean he is free, or would they hold him in a cell in Canada? Or would he get 6 months of relaxing in Toronto as a free man?
No, you're in prison.
So you'd still be in prison. So you'd be in the
Yeah,
Toronto prison.
you're,
Right.
because you're a convicted criminal in California,
Right.
you would still be in custody of the authorities in Canada while you were standing trial.
I figured. Okay. So
So they have
there's only reason to do it then. I wonder if it's
no,
harder
there's
to
reasons to do it for justice.
well, sure, especially if he could, even if he's not
Yeah.
realistically able to get out in 25 years, even if he gets out in 30 years or 35, that's still not proportional to the injustices that he's committed to, that actually he's committed. Because if he could get out at the age of 70, he could have 25 years of life left. He could have 30 years of life left as a free man. And so I wonder if the Canada thing could add another 10 or another X to life sentence, where he really would be in prison at least until he's 95. And maybe there'd be an incentive in that regard.
Yeah, theoretically, sure. I mean,
Um,
that's a bit of a stretch, but
right,
I
right.
would say let him get to 25 and a half before we can figure out what's going on.
Right. And
You
so
know?
another question, did you having such a knowledge, especially with your wife, and I'm gonna have her on too in
Oh
my
yeah,
time.
she's a tremendous guest.
Oh, tremendous,
Yeah.
tremendous. Sorry she couldn't join us this time, but we'll have her definitely. So when did you first hear rumors about Danny Masterson's behavior? I wonder, was it 20 years ago? Was it right when everything began with the trial? Was it 6 months before prosecutors took action? Just out of somebody speaking who's been, had their ear
Uh,
to the ground for so many decades with this thing.
Probably like 2012, 2013, and then
Wow. Okay. So
some,
a solid 10 years before.
no, Tony Ortega and Yasher Ali, they were
Sure.
covering the story, I think 2016, 2017.
Right. Okay.
But I'd heard about it
I hadn't
from
heard about it back then.
former members of the Celebrity Center who'd left the Church of Scientology. It was it was
Interesting.
talked about. There
Right.
was a mass exodus from like 2007 through 2012, 13, 14, 15. That's when Mike Rinder, you know,
Left. Right.
uh, Jason Begay, Mark Headley,
Right.
Claire Headley, and so many other
Of
people
course.
left.
Aaron Mark. Yeah.
So because of this big exodus, and um, there was a lot of talk about what went on at Celebrity Center, and I was doing
Fascinating. Huh? So that's where
podcasts, and
the conversation began.
yeah, I was doing podcasts in 2013, but just hanging around, talking at a restaurant or just out, I heard about like 2012,
Wow.
and I
Interesting.
kept hearing about it from numerous different people,
Wow.
and it was talked about. So it had been known about since 2003, 2004, but I heard about it from these people who had left Celebrity Center,
Fascinating.
and I didn't, there's nothing you could do with it. I mean, and then when Tony started reporting on it, and then there was civil case filed, I got real interested in it, So
Right.
I've kept up my reporting on it,
Yes. Right.
and
Certainly.
Tony's done a great job,
He has.
and
Yeah.
Aaron Smith Levin and the media in general.
Finally.
So
Yeah.
when it came down to sentencing, um, that was when everything wrong with Scientology just converged,
Right.
and justice was done. And I think it would make me question why people stay in Scientology. Like why?
It's weird, man. Yeah.
Well, here's what's weird to me, and we in the interview this way. Um, if Scientology is going to defend Danny Masterson, then it makes all of Scientology false because it began in 1950 as Dianetics. So if 73 years of Scientology and all the work of all the Sea Org members, all the billions of dollars donated, if all of Scientology summates to defending a convicted
Right.
sexual criminal,
And they probably paid for Danny Masterson's defense, right? I mean, I always, just to sidetrack a quick second, I
yeah,
always wondered why, like, if Mazaro was on there, why he wouldn't just say, screw you, Scientology. Oh, they didn't know, maybe they didn't know Scientology made those calls, or Scientology got the wrong idea. And they tried to exert undue influence when Danny didn't ask for it. And I'm not, maybe they're too connected to even try to make that argument. But a better argument would have been Danny Masterson completely separate from the entity of Scientology, and to not listen to David Miscavige. But I assume that Miscavige probably paid the attorney fees, or would you have any insight on that?
no, I don't have any
Right.
insight. I
Nobody would
mean,
know, but
I know that they had to when Danny's $3.3 million bail had to be secured against some real property belonging to the Masterson family.
right. Okay.
So it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that Scientology, through wealthy individuals,
Right.
paid for his defense.
Right.
Because that defense, I don't know. Masterson has money. I mean, he's got residuals.
Right.
So I
Sure.
don't know how the finances worked out,
Right.
and I don't really care. My larger point of all of Scientology comes down to defending a serial sexual predator. Then what
Right.
was the whole point? It's supposed to free
Right.
mankind and
Right.
do all that stuff Hubbard talked about, and yet it comes down to defending this kind of monster.
Right. I mean, look what they did to the
Then
press. Even if they didn't pay for the legal fees, I mean, them trying to control the information about Danny Masterson early on, before it was that big of a thing, before the retrial, right? They were protecting him and protecting the media about him.
yeah, yeah,
And
and
that's the legacy,
it's become out of their control. It's in
right?
the legal system. Who knows where else it leads? The collateral damage has been
Yes, sir.
Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis, and it shows that even proximal contact with
Right.
this,
It's
with
toxic,
a sexual predator is really
radioactive,
bad.
right?
And it also reminds me of when our now Mayor Karen Bass was
Yes, sure.
considered on the short list of vice presidential picks for
Yeah,
President
right. She was
Biden.
good.
But the fact that she had appeared at a Scientology event was worked heavily against her. So it
Right,
seems like even proximal
right.
contact with
Well, the
Scientology
whole
can be
election,
ruinous.
between her and Rick Caruso boiled down to who hated Scientology more.
Well, yeah, and that gets down into the weeds of local politics, but sure,
Right,
that
right.
but
That was
I
one of the big
mean,
issues. Right,
she but it was not just that.
right, sure.
Mayor Baz obviously a lot more qualified, just sheer qualifications. My opinion, right?
Yes. No, as a guy
Just
who built a lot of malls, yes.
I was surprised she didn't stay in Congress because she could have been speaker someday. She was so powerful,
I was surprised too. It was weird to
and
see her run. I was following that
but
election
she
just
might
because I
know,
knew
but
her.
she loves L.A.
Right,
So yeah, there was part of it was a referendum on Scientology, but I think it came down to it that they're both good candidates.
right. I
But I
mean, she
think
only won by
Karen,
4%, 3-4%
yeah,
is a very
it
close
was
race.
close.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So
Um, Interesting, but you're right. But that's what Scientology has hung their legacy on, and that's what they're famous for now. They are, probably now the most famous, aside from Tom Cruise, probably most famous for their involvement with Danny Masterson. And
eh,
Danny
eh,
Masterson is famous, only because of this trial. I mean, I don't know how many people watch The Ranch, but other than that, you know,
yeah,
not that famous of a
that's
guy.
well said. I
Yeah.
mean, Masterson now eclipses science. He so eclipses Scientology, he eclipses Tom Cruise that when you say
Right.
Scientology, the Danny Masterson criminal trial and
Right.
conviction has become synonymous with Scientology.
Right.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Well put. I think we'll probably wrap up. This
Yeah.
is a fascinating, meaty conversation. Anything you want to add? Sorry to be
No,
that
it's
hour
been
and a
great
half.
talking to you, Dodge. Carry
Likewise.
on.
Likewise. Thank you for all your support. Just want to say you were one of the early people to be on my side. So
Yeah.
thank you. It means
Carry
the
on like you.
world.
We really believed in you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I believe, I adore the two of you. And you took
Thank
me
you.
under my wing early on, immediately after I got fired. Must have been a week or so after I
Yeah.
got dinner with
Well,
you.
we
And
want to let you know, it's like that was your baptism of fire, but carry
yeah,
on. Don't
yeah.
let them stop you.
Carry on my wayward son.
So we
Amen.
believe in young journalists who are out there taking on Scientology
Yeah. Well, we learn from the
and anything
best.
else they want to.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, we'll learn from the best. I'll probably have you on once the court case is developed further, and we'll have Karen on as well. But thanks for covering everything.
Sure.
Thanks for following on the finances. That requires its own episode, which we'll do a follow up
Yeah.
as well.
Okay.
But thought after 30,000 views, wanted to thank everybody for that. But I thought after the 30,000 views, an excellent follow up would be someone who really knows what he's talking about, who spent decades fighting against the church, but also fighting for somebody who's kind of your de facto son and fighting in his honor
Yeah.
in a lot of
I'm
ways.
just, part of a large group of people. I'm
Yeah,
just one of many who are fighting, but thank you.
yeah.
Thank you for that.
Amen. Well, thank you. All right, Jeff, you be well. Thanks for all you do.
Okay. Talk to
Take
you,
care,
Dodge.
sir.
Bye.